This is We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling, where I give you the tools and skills you need to love better so you can live better. Marriage is a long business. The person we first meet isn't the person we commit to, and the person we commit to isn't the person we marry. And the person we marry will morph into various versions of themselves over time. Change is a constant in marriage. The people who are most happy in any long-term relationship understand the imperative of change. And even when it's difficult, they support their partner's need to grow because we all need the freedom to grow. To me, the key to navigating the waters of a relationship is most impacted by the extent to which we are skilled or unskilled in communication. And in the spirit of walking the walk, I felt there'd be no better person to have this conversation with than the person who is on the receiving end of the ways in which I communicate. So God help me, I invited my wife, Steph Sterling, to join me for this episode. Steph has been a practicing therapist for 18 years. She and I met when we were at NYU. She was getting her master's degree in clinical social work, and I was getting my PhD in clinical social work. Since then, Steph has carved out a specialty for herself as a couples therapist. She is a certified Imago relationship therapist. She is also trained under John Gottman. And today, she co-owns my practice with me, Alternatives Counseling and Consulting. And when it comes to helping hurt partners understand each other and reconnect, I have never seen anyone better at it than her. Please welcome my wife, Steph Sterling. Steph, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I know that media is not your jam. I know it's not your favorite thing to do. But as I was putting this episode together, it occurred to me that I actually don't have anyone that would be more fitting for it. So I'm so grateful that you're here with me. And also, as I was thinking through this episode, what's interesting to me is that I don't know the answer to so many of these questions. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your answers, and I'm sure that our listeners will be as well. So how and why did you choose couples therapy as your specialty?
Well, because for so long, being in individual therapy, I didn't feel like I got any value out of it. And I thought they kind of sucked. And then, right before we got married, there were 6 months roughly or so before, you said we need to go to Imago therapy, and you found a therapist who did Imago therapy because we had been in couples counseling previously. And Imago therapy worked for us, and it inspired me to get trained and certified in it because it was a different type of interactive therapy where there were things that we did regularly to achieve results. And since it worked for us and we did that and it was actively engaging, I wanted to do the same thing. It became passionate about because I couldn't believe how well it worked.
And now that you're answering that, I'm recalling and comparing and contrasting in my own mind. We had gone to couples therapy. This is not to shit on all our therapists, FYI, but we had gone to couples therapy once before we got into Imago therapy, and we worked with a therapist who was kind of like a generalist. What listeners probably don't know is that you don't have to be certified to say that you specialize in any particular aspect of therapy. You can say that you specialize in couples and have never been certified or trained in couples therapy. It's a problem in our field. We really need to mandate these certifications and these advanced training courses because really we come out of school and the best they can really hope for is that they've taught us how not to fuck people up. That's the best that they can do in 2 years. It's just not enough time. And then once we're in the field, we wet our toes, we get some interests, and then it's our responsibility to get trained in that. And what I'm remembering is that our very first therapist, who was well-meaning and referred by my individual therapist, also well-meaning, she was not trained in couples therapy. And if memory serves, and I'm curious to hear if you recall it being the same as I do, she wasn't great. I don't know how else to say it. She just wasn't great. And she basically let us recreate in her office the same bullshit that caused us to need couples counseling in the first place, which is to say, the dynamic, as I recall, went like this. I was an overtalker. Doesn't surprise any of our listeners. You were a quiet brooder. You internalized your feelings. I externalized my needs. I was very vocal about my needs. I'm guessing it was like a fire hose for you. And when it didn't result in you just going quiet and we were able to communicate, that communication was not good. So we went to this first therapist who actually wasn't certified as a couples therapist. And in that session, we replayed the same stuff that we did at home. We were living together at the time, not yet married. But the same thing happened where I just fire hosed you and you got so flooded, you got up and you walked out the door. You left the couples therapist's office.
Mm-hmm.
And to my amazement, she got up and followed you out the door, which is like therapy 101 rookie mistake. You do not run after the person that leaves a group, a session. It's everybody's right to leave a session. And you certainly don't leave the one that's sitting there alone. And I recall sitting in that office and being like, am I getting punked? Like, is this literally fucking happening? That was the end of that relationship with that couples therapist. And then I found an Imago trained therapist, a certified Imago trained therapist. And what I'm guessing you're saying is that she really was able to hold space differently for us. There was a huge contrast.
Because the first therapist couldn't manage us, right? What happens in therapy is what happens outside of therapy. So people reenact in therapy what they do in their lives outside of therapy. That's normal. But this woman, as you know, many therapists, if they say that they're going to be a couples therapist or that they are a couples therapist, they don't know how to manage the dynamic in a room. And I think that she was listening to me and listening to you and listening to me and listening to you and was kind of like letting us volley back and forth without any coaching or interjection or help with reframing how we were communicating to each other. And I think that was a problem because it was re-damaging because we were doing the same thing without any suggestion or teaching or instruction on how to do things differently so we can improve. Ultimately, you know, it taught us nothing. Let us just kind of go at each other.
It was like a supervised cockfight, I feel. It was terrible. And comparing that to what we did with Michelle, who is certified in Imago, that was just a drastically different experience. And what I hear you saying is that that inspired you.
Yes, because she kept this space safe and she was able to be objective, right? Which is one of the main thing that I believe many clients complain about when they come or what they're afraid of when they come to couples counseling. A lot of my clients have seen couples counselors in the past. And, you know, when I do the consultation, initially before we agree to work together, I tell them that my job is to remain as objective as possible. And I do everything I can to remain as objective as possible. My goal is not to save the relationship. My goal is not to help them end the relationship. My goal is to help them learn how to communicate. And we were not taught how to communicate until we met Michelle. And then nuanced things came in and, you know, she helped us keep the space safe and also for both of us to be able to open up and lean into the space that was uncomfortable to share where we were coming from. There's a structure. She taught us the structure and she held the structure. There was no structure with the other person.
Watching you go through the years of training that you then committed to as part of getting certified as a therapist for couples, I used to have that box ticked on my Psychology Today profile that I would work with couples. When I saw what you went through to get trained in couples counseling, I was like, I do not do this. I don't know how to do this stuff. I was listening to the lectures because like a lot of the work was online. And I was like, this is like a whole different language that I don't speak. I don't have any business having that box checked off on my profile. Took that right the hell down. So when you work with couples, do you always have to cover communication skills?
Absolutely. That is the first thing I start teaching them. And that is the main thread that's woven into every single session, regardless of how long I work for them. The basis of what I teach is communication skills.
Now, people may be surprised to hear this or not. I don't know. But I'm never in the room with you when
Nope.
you're with your clients. I think that's obvious, but just for clarity's sake. So I don't know the answer to this question. Do you set people up in the framework from like session one? This is how I want you to communicate. And then you just reinforce that every time the partners are speaking to each other? Like, how do you even begin to teach them how to communicate with each other?
Well, first I break it down and I give them an overall picture of what it's going to look like. And they nod similar to how you're nodding at me. I think that they really don't know what I'm talking about and I let them know it's kind of an experiential thing. So now that we're virtual, I do as best as I can to mimic what I did when we were all in person. So I have the couple who's usually together unless one is traveling and the other's not, like for business. I have them face each other. Then the very first session that we have, similar to when we work with individuals, we take a history. I take a very similar type of history with the couples. Part of what's important about what I do is learning about their primary caretakers, because their primary caretakers and all sorts of caretakers will have a role in the couples therapy, because we wind up unconsciously picking people who are similar to our primary caretakers' best and worst traits. So I take a history and we get to a point where I want to know some of the things that bother the partner the most, like 5 to 10 things that are on the top of the list of what bothers them about their partner. And then I go right then and there and I start teaching mirroring. So I break it down. There are three main steps of communication that I teach them, but the first is mirroring. So I have them mirror in that session. And sometimes I will mirror the client. I often do, not every single time, but often I'll mirror the client to show them what mirroring is.
Would you
A
mind
lot of
explaining what mirroring is?
So what mirroring is giving back to the person in front of you, who's typically the partner, the spouse, the boyfriend, the girlfriend, etc., what you heard them just say. Now, 80% of communication is nonverbal. So you want to mirror back to the person in front of you what they just communicated to you. And mirroring is not just repeating back, and it is not at all interpreting. It is literally acting as a mirror. This is a way for the person who's saying something to someone, it's a way of reflecting back so they see and experience how they heard them. So some of that includes body language, facial expressions, tone of voice. Now we have to be very careful, because sometimes if there's a tone of voice problem or a facial expression problem, like you're looking at somebody like, what?
100%.
So actually, to back up, mirroring is the second skill. The first skill that I teach is intention. And I have them tell each other, again, we're like a triangle. They're looking at each other and I'm here. So I basically see the sides of their faces looking at each other. And I teach them, how are you going to show up as somebody who's telling your partner something, otherwise known as a sender? How are you going to show up as a sender in a way that lets the person in front of you know you are welcome to come into my world? I want to know what you're going to tell me. I want to hear. I'm very curious. I'm interested, even if it's something that's very difficult, even if there's a recent history of bickering or anger happening or frustration. If there's tension in the air, that's okay. You still want to be able to have the intention of listening, like with your heart, right? And that's hard to do. So another step that I teach is clearing out the stuff that's in your head so you can make room to actually listen to your partner, because a lot of people will talk to their partner. And as like they start talking, now this person is thinking of a response. So now when they're thinking of the front of this person is talking, first few words come and they're thinking of a response. They're no longer hearing what this person is saying.
Right.
So this is about slowing down, clearing out your head and your thoughts, your feelings, everything, so you can make room literally to listen to the person. It's like learning, it's a whole new skill. It's like learning a new language as an adult because you have to hear what you just heard. That might not be fun to hear. And give it back to the person in the way they told you with their words without judgment, without shaming, blaming, or criticizing. But if somebody raises their voice, you can raise your voice back at them. While I say there's no blaming, shaming, or criticizing, there's also no attacking. Imago and this type of communication can never, ever, ever be weaponized, or it's going to be really bad.
So what do you do then, since, as you said, what is it, 70 or 80% of how we communicate is nonverbal? How do you teach people to mirror back the words they're hearing when they're so often fraught with affect and eye rolls and body language that communicates all the things that are not productive in a session or in life?
Well, first, I have them state their intention. Because when somebody states their intention, including tone of voice, facial expressions, and body expressions, meaning like if you have closed arms, you pull back, or you make a face, these things are not going to make the other person feel welcome. And it's going to, and or it can make them feel intimidated or scared to be honest, to be open, to be vulnerable, because you can't connect without vulnerability. So we have a space in between called the relationship space. That's why I have them looking at each other. So if this is you and this is me, my head and a little bit beyond is a relationship space. And I tell them, I do a lot of teaching, I do a lot of talking before we really, really get started and get into practicing the dialogue. And I teach them, they're both in a relationship. They both so you cut it down in middle, they're both 100% responsible for the 50% that they bring to the relationship space, right? So we talk a lot about, I teach them about intention. I have them tell the other person, and I will often cue them in the beginning to get, once they get used to it. So first, my intention is to be a good sender by having a neutral tone of voice. And neutral tone of voice means you're not yelling. You don't have like a judgmental tone. You're not condescending. You're not speaking in a sanctimonious fashion. You're speaking with neutrality at best. And then I have them say, and I'm also going to have neutral facial expressions. So you're not looking at the person like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's not welcome either. And that's not warm. So when people say these things, they're saying them, and I help them and many of my clients, you want to come across, a lot of people I think want to come across with integrity. So it's helpful to say what your intention is. And then I have the person who's listening mirror them. So you intend to come across as a good sender by blah, 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 blah. And they repeat back. So that's the first lesson in mirroring. And then the person's listening, right? So this is so slowed down. Person listening has to state, I intend to come across as a good listener by listening with a warm heart and non-judgment. And you will know that by my posture, my facial expressions, my eye contact. I will not yell at you. I will not interrupt you. And then the person who's going to send a message will repeat all that back. So that's the mirroring. So now both people are set up with intentions themselves, and they know the other person's intentions. Again, we're doing everything we can to keep this space safe. And I'm there. And at first sign of a bad tone of voice, a bad facial expression, or body language, I will interject and help teach them in that moment. Because not only am I teaching a new way to communicate, I'm teaching them how to unlearn all the bad and old habits they have in the way that they currently communicate. So I have to really get in there and sort of role play for them and have them repeat back what I'm saying.
So what are the most common mistakes people make when it comes to communication skills?
The first one I would say is, and these are really in no particular order, but interpretation, which is when somebody interprets what somebody said versus listening to what they're saying. Where if you said to me, when you have a moment later, can we talk about what happened last night when we were watching TV because I was upset? And I say, interpreting what you said, do you want to talk to me there because you're just mad at me and you want to tell me like all the things that I did to piss you off? Like that is not what you said to me. You told me that you asked me if I would be willing to meet with you later and talk about your feelings about last night. And then I added in what I'm imagining, what you want to talk to me about. So that's interpreting, like just, inserting your own thoughts, beliefs, or feelings, often coming out of fear, about what your partner is saying. Oh, and so interpret. So that's one of the mistakes that people make in communicating. The other is interjecting too soon, speaking over, and not letting any person speak. So if I talk over you, I'm definitely not hearing you, and you're going to escalate because I'm interrupting you, not just as annoying in general, and usually escalated when people do that. So another thing that people do is they stonewall, they shut down, and they kind of become like a wall, and they're no longer connected with the person, and you can
They become non
it,
responsive.
yes, it's sort of withdrawn but still being physically present, but emotionally and intellectually just shut down.
And it feels to the other person like they're just checked out. But my
Mhm.
understanding is that people who are stonewalling are often quite activated on the
Yes,
inside.
right. The person who's stonewalling is often arguing and yelling, pissed off in their head, and in their head thinking things that they want to say, but instead they shut down. It's if I think about it, I think it might come across as like a little passive aggressive
Mm-hmm.
because you're there and you're just not contributing. It's often done out of anger.
Is it different than the freeze response when we're, fight, flight, or
Oh
freeze?
yes.
When our amygdala gets activated, sometimes people go into a freeze response and they're so flooded with emotion that they don't have words. They become incapable of communicating. But stonewalling is different from that.
Oh yes, yes. Stonewalling is one's intentional response, which is a non-verbal response. And freezing is, it's almost like your mind stops and there's nothing there to be able to grab at to answer the question. So the stonewaller is choosing not to respond. The freezer has no response at that time.
Got it. Other rookie mistakes people make when it comes to communication?
Blaming, where they're constantly pointing the finger at the other person and not taking any responsibility whatsoever.
How hard is it? I can't, I mean, I know how hard it is to teach an individual this stuff. I can't even fathom, and I've said this a million times, I'll say it until I go to the grave. And I thank God that you do the work that you do so I don't have to do it. It is very hard for me to teach just one person at a time these skills. How hard is it for you to teach a stonewaller that they're stonewalling and then getting them to break through that?
When people come into couples counseling, many times there's what we call a dragger and a draggy. And the draggy,
That's fabulous. And that's so true. There's always somebody with the invisible gun behind their head, isn't there?
yes. So well, not always, actually, not always, a lot of the time, but not always. So I would say, based on my experience, that the stonewaller is usually a draggy, but the person is still there. They're still coming. And what's interesting is that when I meet with couples before we actually start working together, I would say 9.5, if not 9.9% of the time, they will say that they struggle with communication and that's why they're there. So, and I usually won't see the stonewalling initially. because
We know how not to behave, and we try not to do that at first in therapy, whether it's couples or
Mhm.
individual.
And so it's usually a couple of sessions in when I start seeing actually what happens in the relationship, and then a person starts to stonewall. So I will often name it if they don't name it. Well, they won't call it stonewalling. I'll name it and then educate them about what happens. So that increases the possibility and potentiality for divorce. Stonewalling, criticizing, defending, and acting contemptuous are four predictors of divorce. I wouldn't say I see as much contempt in like a relationship, I'm sorry, communication problem or a mistake, but definitely criticizing, defending, and stonewalling are three big mistakes that people make in communication.
And you're saying that these are the biggest indicators of divorce? Like if people don't break these habits?
Yes, that's according to Julie and John Gottman. They have the Gottman method. They have been studying relationships since the 80s, and they say 95% is a prediction in terms of the divorce rate if they don't break the habit of these four things. And so many, I'm guilty of them, many of them, not necessarily all of them, but defensiveness is so hard, I think, for most humans to avoid because it also looks and feels like explaining. So if your partner misunderstood something or their feelings were hurt by something, it's usually one's natural inclination to defend or explain, well, that's not how I meant it, or I didn't mean to do that. I meant it to be, or I didn't mean to sound like this. I meant to sound like that, or I was busy, or it was, you interrupted my thought, or there's so many different reasons, and that it invalidates the person who just spoke. So when somebody says that their feelings are hurt because X, Y, or Z, like the tone of voice that you had with me, when you defend that and make sense of that or explain that, and you're not in the structure of what I teach, that makes the person usually escalate. Defensiveness is the quickest way to escalate a conflict, and validation is the quickest way to de escalate a conflict.
What does validation mean?
Validation is the second part of what I teach in the Imago dialogue. So first there's mirroring. So once you have mirrored your partner till the end, then you validate their perception, meaning that you take what your partner said to you, you make sense of it in your head, and you let them know what makes sense to you about what they just said and why it makes sense to you. So it makes sense to me that you were hurt the other night when I yelled at you during the television show that we were watching because I didn't give you a chance to finish what you were saying. I was harsh with my words. And you really just wanted to have that moment to explain to me what you were explaining, and I jumped in and made you feel like nothing that you were or what you were saying didn't matter, or I didn't care, or I was just angry. Is that right? Like you didn't tell me all that, but if you told, assuming that you told me something along those lines, so you're taking what the person said in the context of the experience, the moment, what you know of them, him or her, them, and wrap that around, like process that in your head and make it make sense to you, even if you don't fully agree with it. So you're communicating to the person in front of you, I understand why you were feeling this way because. So now this person, whether you agree with them or not, you're understanding it so they feel seen and they feel heard and they feel important in the relationship.
And that's the
Um,
essence of what we want as human
mhm,
beings. We want to feel
yes.
heard and we want to know that what we're feeling makes sense to the other person. I like to explain validating as like, here's the sentence stem. I don't get it theoretically well enough to explain everything you just did, but I say, Validating is saying it makes sense to me that you felt insert their emotion here that they actually said, because now use your words to say why it made sense to you, and without all the theory behind it. And I'm never quite sure if that's correct. Is that correct?
So essentially, yes, that is correct with validating, but ultimately, you want to communicate being present with your partner when they're communicating to you and you're validating them. So you're seeing them and they feel important and a part of the relationship versus not mattering. So both people are prioritized, right? Because each person has a chance to express what they're feeling, express why they're feeling it, and have their partner validate them and give it back to them. Nobody wants to feel crazy. Nobody wants to feel alone, especially in the context of a relationship. You want to be seen, you want to be heard. When you're able to express your emotions vulnerably or authentically in a vulnerable way to your person, and they're able to be like, yeah, that makes sense to me, instead of saying like, no, you're wrong, that's not the way it is, and you're trying to convince them why your way is right. You're just caught up in going back and forth, two monologues, two people, and there's no connection, right? So when you have
Mm-hmm.
person A and person B, and person A is able to hear and validate person B, and person B feels that, then they're able to hear and validate person A, and now they're connected.
So I have some questions that are about us, and I am suggesting that these be a little bit shorter, and mostly because I worry about all the dirt that could be spilled. So try and keep these answers condensed as much as you can, Steph. What do you think my biggest communication weakness is? And has it improved? And if not, what can I do to improve it?
Yes, you've been improving, I would say, a lot. I think our communication has improved a lot over the years. So the most improvement that you've made is on how you come across in your tone of voice. Usually, right before we have a dialogue, I will at times, I'm very sensitive. I'm a very sensitive person. And sometimes I read into your tone of voice or it just doesn't feel good. But I've seen you really hear that more and more versus saying that's not the tone of voice that I had or that's not what I meant. So yes, you've made a ton of improvement on your tone of voice. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. We have very different personalities. I am a hybrid extrovert, introvert. You are more of an introvert. How do you think our differences impact our communication skills?
I think that you, as a hybrid introvert extrovert, if I'm understanding or thinking about this correctly, I believe and think and feel that you have an easier time coming to me and expressing how you're feeling, whether it's great or awful or somewhere in the middle. You're able to more easily not only express but articulate what you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling in a
Yeah.
way that gets it out. And I, on the other hand, as a full introvert, take longer to process and think about, do I want to bring this up? Do I need to bring this up? When am I going to bring this up? So it takes me a lot longer to bring things up and to talk to you about how I'm feeling about something. But I do. It's just, and it tends to be a kind of a bit of a struggle in terms of time. It takes a long time usually for me to communicate how I'm feeling.
And how do you think that's impacted our relationship?
Well, I think that that has caused us to look at it and look at the different communication styles and how they come up in a relationship and use it as I like to say, and kind of drive my clients crazy. Whenever there's a conflict, it's an opportunity for growth. So we've addressed it to my, at times, to my dismay. um, but I will say that it has allowed me to come more into this space, and I think it's helped heal our relationship. I'm also able to speak more directly. I think as an introvert, I'm not sure this is a direct result of being an introvert, but I imagine it has a part in it. I think that I've gotten better at, as I said before, saying things more directly as opposed to beating around a bush or hoping that you're going to understand, hoping that you're going to understand what I mean when I say just enough. And I often don't say just enough. So I've had to learn how to fully articulate myself.
We are coming up on our 15th wedding anniversary. And when people hear how long we've been together, we've been married almost 15 years, but we were together 4 years before that and best friends before that. They often think there's some secret sauce that we've got going on. What do you credit our relationship to? Why has it lasted so long?
I think our relationship has lasted so long for many reasons. I guess I can say first and foremost, our friendship. Like you had underscored and talked about it, and I had adopted that belief about, we're friends first, and friends generally don't, or at least us, we don't want to hurt each other, right? I don't want to hurt my best friend. You don't want to hurt your best friend. So our friendship, our knowledge of communication, through learning Imago, me teaching Imago, you teaching individual relationship skills, me teaching relationship skills, and us understanding the fragility of relationships in general. Our relationship is the most fragile thing that we have, and we teach it. So we understand the fragility and we both live with integrity. So you individually separate from me and me individually separate from you. And then together we wouldn't be able to teach these skills to people and not practice them at home. And also just it's when I got trained in Imago, you had to join me on the Imago weekend. So
Oh,
we had
that's
to
right. Not to roll
and
my
we
eyes. So, as part of your training, we had to attend a 3-day immersive weekend workshop where we traveled to the woods, two city girls. I was never more frightened in my life. We traveled to the woods. We had to attend this workshop for 3 straight days where we were immersed in Imago theory and doing the work ourselves as a couple who are participants in it.
yeah, so we had done Imago counseling. We went on this intensive immersive workshop and I had to video record. So part of being an Imago therapist, which is underscored and integrated into the work, is that you have to live this work as well. So we also laugh a lot. We laugh a lot. So I think it works because we've also been through a lot of shit together. I think we've learned over the years to let a lot of things go that we used to not be able to let go because it's just too much and it's not worth it. Right. So I think that we both, again, separately and individually, but also together, have seen and we deal with people who are in pain every day. And most pain that people come to therapy for is the result of other humans, right? People feel pain from other humans. So we see the pain. We both have felt pain and we have felt a lot of pain together. So I think that we've had to learn and use and pull from different tools and skills that we teach and apply it to our own relationship. What would you credit our 15-year marriage almost and almost 20-year relationship to?
Perseverance, an unwillingness to wave a white flag or to tap out. There have been many years for both of us where it's been a grind, and we've stuck through it. And I can say with such sincerity and such integrity that the best decision I make every day is staying in this relationship. And the healing that has come through this relationship for me is unqualifiable and unquantifiable. I have healed so many of my earlier wounds through your care and love. And, that's just an added bonus. Nobody goes into a relationship with a romantic partner wanting them to reparent them, wanting a new mommy or a new daddy. But the love is it's like neosporin on the soul when the tools are employed. And, so you said something a few minutes ago. You were like, We don't start off in a dialogue. A tone happens, and then we decide to go into the dialogue. Because quite frankly, the dialogue, this 2 or 3 step process that you've referenced throughout this conversation, which is mirroring and validating, there's a third part. It's okay that you don't know what it is, you guys. You got the 2 most important parts. As simplistic as those 2 steps sound, this is one of the easiest tools to wrap your head around and one of the hardest tools to practice in real life, because we just want to freestyle. We want to do what feels natural to us. And what feels natural to us is to behave the way the adults in our life behaved when we were children and they were upset with each other, or the way we responded to them getting upset with us when we were children. And unless you won the childhood lottery, that is not going to bode well for you. So we are 2 therapists who use the dialogue, this tool, kind of as a last resort. We don't want to do it. It's not fun. It feels artificial. It feels stifling. But what happens is one of us will shoot either a tone or a look at the other, and the other one will say, can we do a dialogue? Can we use a dialogue? And then what used to take hours, days, weeks, or months is over in minutes. And I have to say that, you know, when we first learned these tools, which we did not learn in school, we learned from our advanced training, and which we learned through our own couples counseling experiences, fails and wins with couples counseling. Just because you have the tools doesn't mean you use them. And so often I find myself not wanting to. And that was a very pervasive pattern for me for many years, many, many years. And in recent years, I'm just like, I don't have the energy for this. Fastest way out of this is through it. Fastest way through it is using this tool. I don't have the energy to be obstinate anymore. I really don't. I don't have the energy. I don't have the desire. One of the beauties of aging is wisdom and giving less fucks and having less energy. And from my perspective, both of our willingness to put down our egos, to set aside our profound desire to be right. We both want to be right. And to just use the tools that we've been taught, because the tools work. They work. And I think perseverance and using relationship skills is what has gotten us through some of the toughest, darkest hours. And yeah, very grateful for you.
And are you?
Steph, thank you so much for being here. I can't even tell you how much it means to me. Obviously, you mean the world to me. This was a very exciting thing for us to do. And you're the best. I love you.
I love you too, Darcy. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling is a Sterling Standard production. This episode was produced by me, Darcy Sterling, with editorial support from Vicky Vergolina. Editing and sound engineering by Bart Migal. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Christiani, Preston Smith, and today's guest, Steph Sterling. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing this topic, please share this episode with them. If you have a question or a comment, email us at darcy@askdrdarcy.com. We'll be back on Tuesday with another episode packed with the relationship, dating, and mental health hacks you've come to expect.